A woman across the street caught me by the mailboxes on a cold Tuesday morning and asked in a low voice, like she was confessing something, whether I knew whose car kept parking in my driveway every week while I was gone. I lived in that house for 31 years. I thought I knew everything about it, every draft, every loose board on the porch steps. So I went out and bought a little camera, the kind you hide, and I aimed it at my own front door. What I watched the next evening took the floor out from under me, and I want to tell you the whole thing, start to finish, because somebody out there needs to hear it. Stay with me to the end, and do me a kindness. Tell me in the comments what town you're listening from. I like knowing how far a story can travel. My name doesn't matter much to the story, but folks around here call me by my first name, so I'll let you do the same. I'm 68. I raised one son in this house and buried my husband out of it 2 winters ago. Hollis and I bought the place the year our boy was born. A brick 2-story on a quiet street in a small Ohio town where the same families have lived for generations, and the hardware store still writes your total on a paper pad. After Hollis passed, the silence in those rooms was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I filled it the only way I knew how. By keeping busy, by keeping a routine, because routine is what holds you up when grief wants to lay you flat. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I drove for Meals on Wheels. I'd leave the house at 9 and not get back until close to 2, carrying warm trays up to other people's porches, knocking, waiting, watching for the curtains to move so I'd know somebody was still in there to answer. A lot of the folks on my route were older than me and lonelier, and I told myself I was doing the Lord's work, though really they were doing as much for me. A woman my age needs a reason to put on real shoes in the morning. I was careful about my house. I want you to understand that, because of what came later. I checked the stove twice before I left. I locked the back door and then walked around and checked it from the outside. Hollis used to tease me about it. "Who's going to bother an old woman in a town like this?" he'd say. "Where the biggest crime all year is somebody's tomatoes going missing." And I'd laugh and check the lock one more time anyway. The first thing I noticed was so small I'm almost embarrassed to say it. Hollis's recliner. After he died, I couldn't bring myself to move it, so it sat angled toward the television exactly the way he left it, and I never sat in it, not once. One Thursday I came home and it was turned, just a few inches, facing more toward the window. I stood in the doorway, with my coat still on, and stared at it, and a cold feeling crawled up the back of my neck. Then I told myself I was being foolish. Maybe the cleaning lady, except I didn't have a cleaning lady anymore. Maybe I'd bumped it dusting. I straightened it, and I let it go. Then there was the watch, Hollis's wristwatch, the gold one I gave him for our 40th. I kept in the top drawer of his dresser inside a felt pouch. I went looking for it one evening because I wanted to hold it, the way you do, and the pouch was empty and the watch was lying loose in the drawer, face up, like somebody had been admiring it. My heart started going. I picked it up and turned it over and over in my hands. I was sure, dead sure, I'd zipped it back in that pouch. But I was also 68, and recently widowed and not sleeping well, and so I did what they want you to do. I doubted myself. I mentioned it to my son the next time he stopped by. I tried to make it sound like nothing, just a funny little thing, isn't it strange? He set down his coffee and looked at me with this soft, worried expression, the one I'd come to know, and he reached over and patted my hand. "Mom," he said, "we talked about this. You've been under a lot of stress. These things happen as we get older, and maybe we should start thinking about a place where you wouldn't have to keep up a whole house by yourself." I told him I wasn't going anywhere, that this was my home, that I carried him through the front door of this house and I intended to leave it feet first and not a day sooner. He smiled and let it drop, but I caught the look that passed between him and his wife, and I didn't have a name yet for what that look meant. I do now. The third thing I could not explain away. I keep a little cash in the house, and a coffee tin in the pantry, a habit from my mother who lived through the Depression and never fully trusted a bank. I had $300 in there, in 20s, folded once. One Tuesday I went to add to it and counted $240. I counted again, and again. $60 short. I sat down on the kitchen stool with that tin in my lap and I felt something I hadn't felt since the night Hollis died, that the ground I was standing on was not solid, that the rules I'd lived by my whole life had quietly stopped applying. I didn't tell my son about the money. Something stopped me. I think a part of me already knew, the way you know a storm's coming before the sky changes, that telling him would only become more proof in his little case that I couldn't be trusted with my own life. So when the woman across the street stopped me by the mailboxes, I was already raw. She's a few years older than me, a widow too, sharp as a tack despite a bad hip that keeps her in her front window most of the day. She'd been wanting to say something for a while, she told me, but she didn't want to alarm me if it was nothing. There's a car, she said, a gray SUV. It pulls into your drive every Tuesday and every Thursday, mid-morning after you've left. Sometimes it's two people. They go right in the front door like they belong there. I figured you'd given somebody a key, a house cleaner maybe, or family, but this morning I watched you pull out at 9, and 20 minutes later, there they were again, and I thought, no. I have to say something. The mailboxes seemed to tilt. I held on to the cold metal of mine to keep my legs under me. Two people, I said, with the key to my house, on the days I'm gone. She nodded slowly. For weeks now, she said, maybe longer. I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. I walked back across the street and into my house, and I stood in the front hall and I looked at it the way you'd look at a stranger. The recliner, the watch, the coffee tin, the faint smell of a perfume that wasn't mine that I'd convinced myself was just drifting in from somewhere, the closet door I'd found open. Every small thing I'd talked myself out of came back at once and lined up in a row, and they all pointed in the same direction. Somebody had been coming into my home, walking through my rooms, touching Hollis's things, counting my money. While I was out carrying soup to other lonely old people, somebody was treating my whole life like it was already theirs to pick through. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark and listened to the house settle, and every creak was a footstep. Around 2 in the morning, I got up and I started going through everything, room by room, like a detective in one of the paperbacks Hollis used to read. I took inventory of my jewelry, my wedding set, my mother's pearls, the little garnet ring from my grandmother. All there. The good silver, the china, all there, so they weren't grabbing the obvious things and running. That scared me more, not less. Thieves who clean you out are at least in a hurry. These people were patient. These people were comfortable. I sat down at the desk in the den where I kept my important papers, and I felt it before I understood it, that the folders were out of order. The deed to the house, my will, the bank statements. Except the bank statements only went back a few months, because a year ago my son had set me up with everything online to make my life easier, he said. Paperless. All of it managed through the computer so I wouldn't have to fuss with envelopes and checkbooks anymore. I let him. He was good with that kind of thing, and I was tired and grieving and grateful for the help. I hadn't really looked at a statement in months. I logged in and balances seemed fine, but something about those tidy folders being shuffled made my skin crawl. Somebody had been photographing my papers? I was sure of it. By the time the sun came up, I had stopped feeling afraid and started feeling something harder and clearer. I'm not a dramatic woman. I taught school nursing for 26 years. I've held screaming children still for stitches, and I've told parents news no parent wants to hear, and I learned a long time ago that panic helps nobody. What I needed was not to be afraid. What I needed was proof so plain that no soft voice could pat my hand and turn it into a symptom. I'd seen the little cameras advertised, the ones people used to spy on the dog or check the babysitter. So that morning I drove 2 towns over where nobody would know me to an electronics store, and I walked up to the counter and told a young man with a lanyard that I needed a small camera, something I could hide, that would record all day on its own, and that a person who is bad with technology could actually work. He didn't ask me why. He must have seen something in my face because his whole manner changed and got gentle and serious, and he walked me through 2 or 3 of them and showed me how to charge it and how to start it with one button and how to plug it into my computer afterward to watch what it caught. I left with a camera the size of a matchbook and a feeling in my chest I hadn't had in 2 years. Purpose. I waited for Tuesday. It was the longest weekend of my life. I practiced with that camera a dozen times, recording the empty living room and watching it back to make sure I'd done it right. I settled on hiding it on the bookshelf by the front door, behind a row of Hollis's old westerns, with just the lens peeking out between two spines, pointed straight at the entry. Then I did one more thing, an old trick I'd read in one of those paperbacks. Before I left Tuesday morning, I licked the tip of a single white hair from my own head and laid it across the gap of the front door, low, pressed into the seam where you'd never see it unless you knew to look. If the door opened, the hair would fall. I started the camera at 8:30. I locked the door and checked it twice, and I drove off to my route like it was any other Tuesday. I'll tell you, I could not keep my mind on the meals. I handed a man his lunch and called him by the wrong name. The whole route I kept seeing my own front door in my head, opening, and a faceless shape stepping through it. I finished early. I couldn't help it. I drove home and parked a block away, around the corner where my car wouldn't be seen, and I made myself sit there until I was sure they'd be gone. At 1:45, I walked up my own front steps with my heart slamming. The white hair was gone. It lay on the welcome mat, a thin, pale curl against the bristles. Somebody had been inside. I let myself in, locked the door behind me, slid the chain across with shaking fingers, and went straight to the bookshelf. I pulled the camera out from behind the westerns and carried it to the kitchen table and plugged it into the laptop my son had given me. It took me 3 tries to find the right file. My hands wouldn't cooperate, but then there it was. Hours of footage of my own quiet living room, and I started watching, jumping it forward, the morning light sliding across the floor in fast little jerks. At 17 minutes past 10, on the clock in the corner of the screen, my front door opened. I stopped breathing. A woman came in first, and I knew her at once, my daughter-in-law. My son's wife. She walked in like she'd done it 100 times, dropped her purse on the table by the door, hung her coat on my coat hook. Behind her came a second woman I'd never seen, older, maybe 50, in a blazer and slacks, carrying a leather folio under her arm, all business. The camera caught their voices clear as anything. "We've got till 2, my daughter-in-law said. She's never back before 2 on Tuesdays." The second woman set her folio on my dining table and started taking out papers, spreading them across the wood where Hollis and I had eaten supper for 30 years. "I need 3 more signatures on the power of attorney," she said, "and then we can file. The geriatric evaluation is the key. Once we get a doctor on record saying she's showing decline, the conservatorship petition goes through, and there's nothing she can do about it. She won't even have standing to object." My daughter-in-law laughed. A short, easy laugh, like they were planning a dinner party. "She has no idea," she said. "None. She thinks she's losing her marbles. We've got her half convinced already. You move a chair, she spends a week wondering if she's going crazy." I had to pause it. I sat there with my hand pressed over my mouth, staring at the frozen picture of these 2 women standing in my dining room, and I made myself breathe. Then I made myself press play again, because I had to know all of it. The second woman walked around my living room like she was appraising it. "The house alone is worth what now?" she asked. And my daughter-in-law said upper 200s, free and clear, no mortgage, plus whatever's in the accounts. And the second woman nodded and said, "And your husband's on board with all of it." "Your husband?" "My son. He's the one pushing the timeline," my daughter-in-law said. "He wants it wrapped up before the holidays. He says the longer we wait, the more chance she does something stupid like changing the will." I won't pretend to you that I understood in that moment everything I was looking at. I just knew the center of my chest had caved in. The baby I nursed in the front bedroom of this house, the boy whose fevers I sat up with, the man whose first wedding I paid for and whose divorce I helped him through, and whose son I'd loved like my own breath. He had sat at my kitchen table drinking my coffee and patting my hand and telling me, gently, sadly, that I was losing my mind. And the whole time he was the one stealing it from me piece by piece, a chair turned here, a watch moved there, until I'd be ready to be declared too far gone to know my own name. So he could take the house, so he could take everything. I watched the rest of the footage twice more that night, sitting in the dark kitchen, no lights on. They were in no hurry. The second woman photographed every paper in my desk. My daughter-in-law went into my bedroom and came out wearing my mother's pearls, looked at herself in the hall mirror, laughed, and put them back. They made coffee in my pot and drank it in my chairs. Before they left, the second woman gathered her folder and said, "Next visit, we bring the doctor's questionnaire and we start documenting. We need a paper trail showing she's confused. Little things, misplaced items, repeated questions. By spring she'll be a ward of the court. Then they let themselves out my front door, and the recording went back to nothing but my empty living room and the light moving across the floor. I want to tell you what I did next because it matters. I did not call my son and scream at him. I did not even call the police. Not yet, and I'll tell you why. Because I could already hear how it would go. The woman in the blazer wasn't some street thug. She carried herself like a professional. She had paperwork. She probably had a title and a website. My daughter-in-law would weep and say she was only trying to help her poor, confused mother-in-law. And my son, my own son, would stand there with that sad, soft face and tell everyone, "See, this is exactly the problem. Mom's accusing her own family of breaking in. She's not well. She imagines things." The very thing I'd be saying to defend myself would become their best evidence against me. An old woman seeing conspiracies, I'd watch them build that picture of me for months. If I walked into a police station shaking and crying, I'd be handing them the last brick. No, I needed more than the video. I needed to be unassailable. I needed proof of the money, and I needed proof, in black and white, signed by a doctor, that there was not one single thing wrong with my mind. I made 3 copies of the video onto little flash drives. I hid one in the lining of an old coat in the back of my closet. I drove one across the street and put it in the hand of the woman who'd warned me and told her to keep it somewhere safe and not to tell a soul. And I sat down at that computer and I finally, really looked at my own bank accounts. Not the front page, but everything going back a full year, line by line. It took me most of the night, but I found it. Small transfers, 200 here, 400 there. To an account I didn't recognize, spread out over months, so no single one would catch your eye. A credit card I'd never applied for, opened in my name, run up to nearly $9,000, automatic payments rerouted. All of it managed through the very online access I'd handed my son a year ago so my life would be easier. When I added it together, my hands went cold. More than $14,000, gone, drained out of a widow's savings, a careful spoonful at a time. In the morning, I drove to my bank, the same branch where Hollis and I had banked since Carter was president, and I asked to speak with the manager privately. A kind, careful man. He sat me down and I laid it all out for him, and I watched his face change as he pulled up the records on his own screen. He confirmed every transfer. He confirmed the credit card had been opened online using my information. "This is fraud," he told me quietly. "This is a crime. And given who you're telling me is involved, we need to be very, very careful and very thorough." He helped me freeze the accounts, lock everything down, and he printed me a stack of statements an inch thick, every fraudulent line highlighted in yellow. That afternoon, my son called. I let it ring 4 times before I answered, looking at his name on the screen. His voice was warm as ever. "Hey, Mom. Just checking in. Listen, I was talking to a friend who does elder care planning, really sharp lady, and I think it'd be smart to have her come by and just do a little assessment. Make sure you've got everything in order, in case anything ever happened. Wouldn't hurt to have a doctor take a quick look too, just to be safe. Just to be safe." I held the phone so tight my fingers ached. A month before, I might have said yes. I might have thanked him for caring. Instead, I heard my own voice come out steady and even, the voice I used to use on frightened parents in the school clinic. "That's thoughtful of you," I said. "Let me think about it." And I hung up before he could push. I knew I couldn't fight this alone, and I knew pride wouldn't save me, so I went back across the street. The woman who'd warned me listened to the whole thing at her kitchen table, and when I finished, she didn't gasp or fuss. She reached over and held my hand and said, "You need more than me, and you need more than a lawyer. You need people with letters after their names who'll stand up and say you're sound of mind." Then she told me her granddaughter was an attorney, an elder law attorney specifically in the city an hour north, and she picked up the phone right then and called her. The granddaughter drove down 2 days later. A young woman, crisp and clear-eyed, who sat with me for 3 hours and watched the video and read the bank statements and asked me question after question. And at the end she looked at me and said something I'll never forget. "Ma'am," she said, "what you're describing has a name. It's called financial exploitation of an elder, And what your son and his wife are setting up is what we call a conservatorship grab. They isolate you. They manufacture evidence that you're incompetent. They get a court to take away your right to make your own decisions. And then they have legal control of everything you own. It's more common than you'd believe, and it's usually family, and the part that breaks people is exactly the part that's going to save you. You saw it coming, and you documented it. Most victims never do. She brought in a geriatrician the following week, a calm, thorough woman who came to the house and spent the better part of an afternoon testing me. Memory, reasoning, problem-solving, current events, the date, the names of my grandchildren. She never once talked down to me. She treated me like a grown woman, which after months of being treated like a child was almost enough to make me cry. When she finished, she packed up her things and said she'd have the report in a few days. The report, when it came, was 4 pages long. The short version was this: I scored above average for my age on every single measure. There was no indication of cognitive decline of any kind. The doctor noted in careful clinical language that I presented as alert, oriented, and fully capable of managing my own affairs. I held those 4 pages and I wept, but not from sadness, from the relief of having it in writing, from a stranger with a medical license, that I was exactly who I'd always known myself to be. The attorney took everything: the video, the bank records, the doctor's report, the statement from the woman across the street, and she walked it into the police station herself and put it on the desk of a detective who handled these cases. And here's the thing they hadn't counted on: my son and his wife and that woman in the blazer. They'd built their whole plan on the idea that I was a confused old lady whose word meant nothing. They never imagined the confused old lady would walk in with time-stamped video, a forensic accounting, and a clean bill of mental health. The woman in the blazer turned out to have done this before, to 2 other families. The detective had been hoping for years that one of her victims would have the proof to make a case stick. I gave it to him. I'll spare you the long months of it, the depositions and the waiting and the lawyers. But I'll tell you the part you want to hear. My daughter-in-law tried to claim she'd been let in, that I'd given her a key and forgotten, until the video showed her using a key I'd never given her and laughing about how I had no idea. The woman in the blazer's professional license was revoked, and with the pattern across 3 families, she was charged with multiple felonies. And my son, I sat in that courtroom in a navy dress with Hollis's gold watch on my own wrist, and I listened to the prosecutor lay out, line by line, what my child had done to me: the transfers, the forged credit account, the plan to have his own mother declared incompetent so he could sell the house I'd raised him in. He pleaded for leniency. He cried. He said he'd been under financial pressure, that things had gotten out of hand, that he loved me. And I watched him say it, and I felt the strangest thing, which was almost nothing at all, just a wide, quiet emptiness where my son used to be. He was convicted of elder financial exploitation and fraud. The woman in the blazer got the longest sentence of the 3. The court ordered full restitution, and because there was real property and real assets behind it, I actually got it. The $14,000 and more, recovered through the seizure of what they'd taken and what they had. It wasn't about the money by then. The money was just the proof made solid. What hurt, what still hurts, was my granddaughter. 14 years old and caught in the middle of the wreckage of her own father's choices. Her mother went away too, for a lighter sentence, and the girl ended up needing somewhere steady to land. So she landed here, in this house, in the front bedroom that used to be her father's. She asked me once, late at night, whether I hated her dad, and I told her the truth. I said I hate what he did, but I'm mostly just sad, honey, that he chose money over the people who loved him. You can love your father and still know that what he did was wrong. Both of those can live in you at the same time. I've got room for both. I'm 70 now. The house is mine, free and clear, rekeyed, with a real alarm system and a doorbell camera I'm no longer ashamed to have. The woman across the street and I have dinner together twice a week, and her granddaughter, the attorney, calls just to check on me. I started volunteering with a group that helps other older folks who suspect somebody's draining them dry but can't prove it and don't know where to turn. I tell them my story. I tell them, document everything. Trust the cold feeling in your chest. You are not losing your mind. My granddaughter graduates high school in the spring, and she's the first thing I see most mornings, sitting at my kitchen table doing her homework before school. In the same kitchen where I once sat in the dark watching the worst thing I've ever seen on a tiny screen. Everything they told me I was about to lose, my home, my independence, my family, my mind, I didn't lose any of it. I found it again, all of it, just not in the hands I expected. So let me ask you, before you go, what would you do if the betrayal came from inside your own family, from the one person who was supposed to protect you? Sit with that. And if something in your own life has been quietly telling you that things don't add up, that your memory is fine and it's the world around you that's lying, listen to it, write it down, find one person who'll stand with you. You are not confused and you are not finished, and you deserve every bit of the dignity they're trying to take. Stay safe out there and don't ever let anybody talk you out of trusting yourself.